Vanakkam, Namaskara, Namaste, and hello. You are in the Rosemilk Podcast with me, Lakshmi. Today, we're going to have a very deep conversation about leadership, what is real leadership, and how to give effective feedback to your superiors. So, today we have with us Mr. James Warren, the founder of the company Share More Stories, a company that blends AI and storytelling to create an impact among the people. So I'm so glad that this happened, James, and thank you for doing this. And firstly, welcome to the podcast, the Rosemilk Podcast. So do you want to give an introduction to yourself, share more stories, and maybe your journey so far? We'll get started there.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation with you and explore leadership in particular. As you said, I'm the founder of Share More Stories, and we are a human experience research company. Human experiences around employee experience, customer experience, and stakeholder or community experiences. And so really what that means is we're using stories to help people understand themselves, understand their teams, understand their customers, and then we use a lot of AI to turn those stories into actionable insight. And I've been doing this now for about 11 years. This was sort of my second career after my first career was in corporate America, and I've learned a lot about leadership from both of those journeys, both the work I did in a large corporation and the work I do helping companies today. So it's been a good journey so far.
Wow, nice. That's wonderful. And I think many people do know about your company, but I'm so glad that many more are going to know after this podcast. So let's get started. As our topic is mainly about leadership, real leader, right? So my first segment would be why giving feedback to your superiors matters so much. And most of the time it's overlooked. So how do you see that?
I think it's a great question because I think, it depends on the culture of the organization and what that leader's personal style is. But I think when you look across organizations more and more, leaders have to be able to navigate the business, the organization, the external environment. They have to be able to navigate their own journey and where their team is at, not just performance-wise, but sometimes where a team is at emotionally or where a team is at in their growth and development. And those are a lot of things for an individual to be responsible for. And I've never met a leader who gets it right all the time. I've never met a leader who is perfect or knows the right answer to every question. So part of it is giving feedback and creating a culture of feedback allows leaders to know what they don't know. It allows leaders to learn. And I think in this context, everybody is a leader, but I know we're talking about people who maybe lead teams and have direct reports. And so if a leader doesn't know how they are showing up in a given situation, even if we think they should, the only way that they'll find out is through feedback. And if we give them that feedback earlier, they have a chance to correct it faster. If we wait till give that feedback, then the things that they're doing probably get compounded. And again, I think so much of this depends on the culture, depends on whether or not feedback is valued in that culture, whether leaders are expected to seek feedback, because sometimes, we have feedback for people, but if they don't want to hear it, if they're not open to it, it becomes really, really, really hard to share it. So I think the real reason why it's so necessary is because leaders, like every human being, we have blind spots. We have things we don't know about ourselves, or maybe we know, but we don't always recognize them in the moment. And we may be showing up in a way that even if we don't intend it, it could be leaving an impact that's not favorable on an individual, on a team, or if you're making really big leadership decisions, it could affect the whole organization or the whole brand.
So true, yeah. So I think from what I understand is a leader is not, seeking perfection. He or she is learning from what happened yesterday, right? It's just, you're just getting better. So that's nice. And I think most of the organizations lack this. Why it's overlooked is a big question there. Started a company that provides other organizations an opportunity to understand their people for various reasons, even if it's just sometimes selfish reasons for business and things like that. At least it's ending up to some good reasons, like the employee is able to talk on what he feels about the company or the department or whatever. So it's win-win for both the company as well as the employees who are working.
Definitely, because one of the things that we have learned is, especially in organizations organizations where you say we want to improve, say, engagement, or we want to increase employee satisfaction, employee retention, then one of the things you need to do is figure out if your plans and strategies to do that are working. And a lot of companies have things like employee engagement surveys, or on the customer side, they have, NPS or customer satisfaction or other sort of CX measurements. One of the things we've learned is that those things fall short in one or two key areas. They fall short when it comes to people being able to explain not just what happened, but how it makes them feel, or to really understand the emotional part of their experience. Some things it's like, well, is every part of our experience in a company emotional? I'd say sure. I think there's plenty of things we feel throughout the day, even if we don't make them conscious. We're feeling all day because that's how we are as humans. And so I don't react to everything I feel, but I feel it. And so I think that in a company, when you have maybe a challenging situation, maybe the company's going through a merger, or you're trying to expand into a new market, or anything that's putting stress on, or maybe there's just business conditions that are different, or the leadership has changed. Those are really occasions where leadership should really pay attention. How are our employees navigating this situation? How do they experience it? How are they feeling about it? What can we learn about them?
Yeah, and I think we spend most of our time in the organization, like 8 to 9 hours a day. We are in that place. It's almost like second home, and obviously we will be emotional in every aspect that happens there. Not able to speak your mind, if at least not every single time, at least most of the times, is very difficult. Like, that's a lot of stress, and I think that's where many employees end up being this silent resignation they give. They're just working, and that's very bad culture, and it is not helpful for the growth of the organization. So if I have to ask you, what made you start company? Share more stories.
I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and build a company. I love to write, and I love to tell stories. So I kind of felt like it was time to put those two ideas together. And when I started the company, I really thought we were going to build a new platform to sort of compete in social media, social networking in particular, because I felt even then, 10 plus years ago, that our current platforms weren't going to meet our needs. They weren't serving us well. They didn't give us the opportunity to really connect anymore. There's still things that I feel like connecting with long ago friends, or just staying in touch with what's going on in people's lives, that is helpful, but that's not where real deep connection is nourished. I think if you look at social today, it's definitely going from social networking to social media, where one person's creating content for thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, and very few people contribute that much content. So I think a lot of us feel a desire to be heard in places that it makes sense for us to be heard, whether that's at work or in our communities or anywhere else. So we created the platform at first because we just wanted to make a place where people could express themselves different. And in doing that, we started to hear from, some of the folks I used to work with in marketing and communications or in organizational leadership, and they'd say, this is great. Like, how could you use this in the brand, or how could you use this in the organization? And initially I was resistant to that, because I was like, this is not a tool for that. It's not an organizational engagement tool. It's not a brand engagement tool. But they wore me down. So they started to ask, well, it'd be really great if we could figure out how to use this storytelling to drive the connection you seek, but to do it in our business or in our community or with our teams. So we started shifting from a business model standpoint, figuring out how we could support companies and organizations, mainly in not mainly, but some in the for-profit sector, some not-for-profit, and some even public sector organizations. And the idea to turn that into insights really came because I always intuitively believed that stories hold a lot of lessons, which is why I want people to give them and share them, because as feedback, if you tell me stories about your experience with me, there's a lesson in there. But there's also a chance to really connect emotionally. When we express our opinions, we wind up debating. But when we share our stories, we wind up empathizing with each other. And so in the organization in particular, if you really want to strengthen the culture, you've got to make places where people can feel like they connect with each other versus are in conflict or in disagreement with each other. And so stories is a great way to do that. It's also a great way to learn about the organization, your leadership, the culture, because when people are telling you stories about what it's like to work here, or the most impactful time I've ever had, or what I think signifies our culture, you can really turn those stories into rich insight to make the culture better, to improve the employee experience.
Nice. That's, I think, wonderful. Because, yeah, you're very right. Nobody wants to listen to your opinions. Maybe they don't have time, or maybe they're very judgmental these days.
Exactly.
So
we have lots of opinions, so that's like, yeah, that's a lot. I hear you.
By sharing stories, everybody likes to hear stories, and and you'll feel for that person, because I'm very sure who is talking about their story is, and who's listening is also gone through some or the other thing with that story that he's saying. So if I have to move to the next segment, it's, I think, the most important part, where what are the challenges you face, to bring out the actual thing from the people or the employees. Okay, so what are the challenges? Like, I'm very sure it's very difficult because there are a lot of things going on in an organization, right? Like, I'll be working 8 hours and suddenly we have this survey that comes in. It's very irritating to just give even a one-word answer. I'm telling you on a serious note. Like, we just randomly click something and it goes. And actually nobody even bothers about whether you gave or not.
Yeah, you're hitting on something really important, which is, I would say there's two pieces. There's trust and there's fear, right? And so sometimes what we've learned over the years is, when it comes to sharing a story or giving feedback or anything like that, there's a couple of fears that are happening for a lot of people. One is just the fear of being vulnerable, because a lot of people don't want to be vulnerable if they don't feel safe. Another is the fear of being judged based on what I say, right? And so if I say something and somebody, doesn't like it or thinks it's silly or, reflects on me, then I might feel judged. And then another is the fear of loss of privacy. If I say this, can I trust that the system will allow me to say it privately or confidentially or anonymously? And so I think, the reason why those things exist is because people generally have some level of less than total trust, right? And that's usually because people have learned, hey, if I say this one thing and it comes back on me, that could really hurt me. For the organization, if you have that kind of mistrust, it's a real challenge, because that means people are not telling you things that you should know because they don't trust you or they don't trust the system. So the thing you need to know most, you're not getting because they don't trust you. And so what we try to do, and what I've learned to do just in my own career as a leader and as a person reporting to other people, is first I have to build relationship. And if I don't have a relationship, then I have to demonstrate in small steps why it is okay to trust me or trust this process or trust the system. And I can't just say, trust me. I have to demonstrate it. I have to prove to you why you should trust me. One of the best ways a leader, if they have a low trust environment, the best way they can quickly start to build a small amount of trust is to lead by example, to say, you know what, I know sharing your stories or your feedback can be challenging and you can feel vulnerable. Let me go first to show you and demonstrate that I'm willing to be vulnerable. So in some cases, in order for the leader to better listen, they actually have to demonstrate to others that they're willing to be vulnerable, so that that team will say, oh, you shared a pretty vulnerable story with us and a pretty honest one. I will share one too. And so I think, that's the first thing, is you have to have the climate or the environment where people feel safe enough to do that. We talk a lot about 3 things that are important in this process. One is to just be authentic, to be yourself. That's one way to overcome it. You don't have to be anybody else. You don't have to sound like anybody else. You don't have to, if your teammate has an issue and that's not your issue, you don't have to share their story. You can just focus on your experience. The second is to be courageous. And to be courageous means if you do want to see things improve, even if you don't want to take on the responsibility for the whole company, but you want your own job to be better, or you want your experience to be better, there's always something we can do to help make our own situation a little bit better, almost always. And in that case, courage is what I need to overcome that fear, to say, you know what, it's worth me making even a small step to try to create a better situation for myself, for my team, for my teammates, and for maybe people who come after me. And then the third is to just be curious, because if I'm willing to share, there's a good chance that somebody else might share something else, and that will help me learn too, even if I'm not the leader of that team, even if I'm the person reporting in. If I take that step, chances are I'm going to learn something about myself or somebody else. And so, when we do those things as both the leader and the team member, it creates a climate, even right away, where people feel like, oh, you know what? Now that you say that, it makes me think of this and it makes me think of that. And so we used to do a lot of this work in small groups, like workshops.
Okay.
Either sometimes the team leader would be there because they had a lot of trust. Sometimes the team leader could not be there because there was not enough trust. And as we started to get those stories, we could share really rich insight with those leaders. But then we started hearing from organizations like, this is great, but I can't collect this kind of feedback with 100 workshops. Can you make it easier and more scalable? So we built a platform to do it. And the thing that was fascinating is I was worried. I was very worried that what would happen in these small groups where we could have the conversation and kind of coach people to open up. I was worried that we would lose that and that they wouldn't be as open or just as emotional. And in some ways, they went more emotional because by being able to have the privacy of the platform and they could just sort of express themselves without worrying even who else was in the room, they went deeper. They opened up more. They wrote more. They shared more.
Wow.
So it was fascinating to me to realize, even after we thought we understood people's barriers and motivators to providing feedback or to sharing their organizational or job experience, I thought we understood that. And then when we launched the platform, we learned something new, which was the privacy and the anonymity of the platform can also be a way of somebody feeling safe. Nobody knows who I am. I sign up, I get an anonymous username, and I share my story. That turns out to be pretty powerful, especially if you're collecting feedback on a challenging situation, or if the leader has a lot to learn and a lot to improve. It makes it a lot easier to package it up that way.
Nice. That anonymity that you talked about is the key there, because there are two different scenarios here, right? Like the feedback that you give to the people who are under you and the feedback that you give to the people above you. When you give to the people above you, how do you maintain that anonymity, or like as you said, if there's that climate is not set up for you, but you're forced to give that feedback, so how do you resist that retaliation, or how do you do that and share more stories?
I mean, it's a great question because, again, if you're in to your point, a low trust environment or a negative climate, the hard truth is it's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. And you often need to be able to, if you have a leader who's created so much fear in their team, that leader's not effective. They're not doing such a core part of their job, because it means their team is afraid to make a mistake or to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So they're not working at their best because of fear. And so I guarantee you, if you have a team leader whose team is afraid of them, they probably hopefully won't be in that job very long unless they're willing to change. And if they're willing to change, that starts with some reflection. The best way to solve that is for senior leaders or whoever is it's like you got a department leader, then you might have a couple of team leaders, and then you might have people who report to them. That department leader needs to set the tone, to say, hey, I want you to get feedback from your team, and I want them to be able to provide it to you. And so that way people know that it's not just maybe me worrying about what my boss might say or do if they don't like the feedback they got. I know that the organization is committed to it and sees it as part of the leadership development and the leadership responsibility. But that said, you still have times where people might worry about what they say and will this come back to me? And so the first thing is, just like in any of the research, the goal is not to say we talked to 100 people and here's what each of those 100 people wants you to know. The goal is to look at that and say, what are the themes? What's the big story emerging from all of these little stories? What are the emotions around those experiences? So it quickly moves from person A, person B, and person C each said this to this is the group's collective experience. This is how they're navigating this. This is how they experience the organizational culture and also the culture working in your team or in your department. Because we both know you could have a great organizational culture, but if you have a leader who's struggling or just is not good, the culture under them will be different. You will experience a disconnect because you will feel like,
exactly,
yeah. I love the company, but my day-to-day job is not amazing. And that can be really hard. The way to figure that out is to identify it through the feedback. So we just try to make it really easy for people to share their own story, keep them anonymized, keep their stories, their identity confidential, And then our analysis is really about summarizing what we're hearing across people, across departments, across geographies, because that's really, the point is not to say, let's figure out who said what. The point is to really say, what do you need to know as a leader so you can be more effective in leading this team or leading this organization or leading this company?
Yeah, because experience with this feedback, unfortunately I was the only team member and I had to give a feedback which was a constructive one to my manager. It wasn't taken in the right spirit. There was a lot of retaliation after that, and then I lost this thing of giving feedback to people, and I found a way to have a workaround with such people. So, and that kind of sort of worked for me, and it's currently working as well. Because there are a lot of people with various work ethics, right? And you really cannot change them, nor can you change your work ethic. You should have a peace of mind when you're working in a place. I found this workaround to be more effective for myself as of now.
No, I was going to say, I wanted to jump in on that because when you said you talked about the challenge of giving feedback to a manager, I can think of those times. One of the things I learned was, and I think this is true anytime we have to give difficult feedback. It could be the feedback is tough, or the relationship is not very strong, so it can be hard. Sometimes it's hard to give feedback to people you have a very, very good relationship with because you feel like, am I going to hurt their feelings? And maybe you care about that because you know them. I think anytime you have to give difficult feedback, I think one of the things that I've found is helpful is to first just acknowledge it's difficult. Like, I don't have to pretend that it's easy. I can say, I know this is difficult for you. I can assume it's difficult for you, but I know it's difficult for me. And then state my intention. My intention is to try to be helpful for both of us to improve what we're doing, to improve our working relationship, and to improve, I always focus on like the impact. We're trying to make a better impact. So my feedback is to try to help us together make a better impact. And then I try to focus on not so much judgments, just observations. So my job, especially if I'm giving feedback up, my job is not to tell my manager, I think you're doing a good job or a bad job. My job is to say, when you do these things, this is the impact it has on me and my ability to perform. So when you give feedback to me in a constructive way, right when the situation occurred, that helps me know exactly what we're talking about and remember it. When you give me feedback 6 months later about a conversation we had 6 months ago, it's not helpful for me because I don't really remember and I can't make the adjustment. And so whatever that is, or hey, when you talked to me that way, it would be easy for me to say, when you talked to me that way, it was disrespectful and I was offended. And that may be my truth. And another way I could say it is, when you talk to me that way in front of my colleagues, I feel like it demonstrated a lack of respect. And I don't think those are the behaviors that either you or I or anybody should demonstrate, because if you do that, then they may think it's okay to do that, and somebody else may think it's okay to do that. And so, when you talk to me in that way, or when you treat me that way in front of my teammates, it makes me feel unsupported, and then I'm less inclined to go the extra mile. And so, there's different ways to focus less on, I'm judging you and your actions and your motives, and I'm telling you how your actions impacted me. And some leaders will hear that, and some leaders won't. And then you have a different issue. It's time to, like you said, it's time to find a workaround. If you have a leader who won't listen to any feedback, that's a hard time.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. Another important aspect of this podcast is to actually learn from you. I'm sure you would have had a lot of companies approaching you for this feedback thing. And what would be the best practices for one to give a feedback to his or her superior?
Great question. So I think there's a few things. I think, especially if we're just talking like the day-to-day relationship between the employee and their manager. If you have a formal system for giving feedback, use it. If you don't, then you have to create an opportunity. And so part of it is to let a manager know, hey, I would like to sit down when we have a chance within the near future, time that's good for both of our schedules, because I want to discuss the situation that happened before. And I want to talk about how I experienced that situation, maybe understand a little bit more what your intent was. And then, you can tell them, sometimes you can tell them in advance, or sometimes if you think it's going to be a little bit of a conflict, you can discuss it in the session. If you think it's a real performance issue, it's always best to include, in my opinion, your HR department, or at least another leader or a mentor that you trust. If you don't want to make it so official, like bringing in HR could change the whole conversation. So you have to know that. But if you're not ready to bring in HR, consult a mentor that you trust to say, hey, I'm trying to have this conversation with my manager about this situation. I'd love to practice, maybe role play with you and get some feedback on how I'm going to tee it up. Because oftentimes when we're trying to have a difficult conversation, we're also processing our own fear about, I hope I say it right, and I hope this doesn't make it worse, and I hope they understand why I'm trying to do it. And so the best way to navigate that fear is just to practice it, to role play it. And so the role play helps me figure out what are things that if I say it this way, I'm likely to get us, derailed and talking about something other than the issue. And what are things I could say that help my manager understand, as long as they haven't done something like violate the company's policies. I'm not trying to, get you in trouble. I'm just trying to share how your actions impacted me. And this goes back to a little bit of that courage. If I want it to be better, and I think there's an opportunity, then I might have to find a little bit of courage to do so. I also don't think employees, it's not on an employee to solve their leader's problem for them. So if the leader is making it really, really difficult to give feedback in the first place, then you almost have to find a different source to give that feedback. And it might be your manager's manager, or it might be your manager's peer, and say, hey, I want to give this feedback, but in my own experience, they're not receptive. So I'd really like some advice and guidance on how to do it. And I think, 9 times out of 10, that's kind of approach helps you. I like to, whenever I'm going to have a challenging conversation, I like to practice it. I like to write it down. But what are the key points that I'm going to say? And I want to role play that, because the more comfortable I am with what I have to say, the easier it is going to be for me to say it, and therefore it'll be easier for them to hear what I have to say. If I'm all over the place, or if I'm nervous, or if I'm not prepared, they're going to have a hard time understanding me. But that's true, not just when I'm giving feedback up, that's true if I'm giving feedback to a teammate or feedback to somebody who reports to me. I have to be prepared for that conversation. And if I think it's going to be tough for them to hear it, I should find a place where it's easier for us to have it, like a neutral place. Maybe I don't want to have it in my boss's office. Maybe I don't want to have it in my office either, or my workstation. So maybe we say, hey, can we go down to the lobby or to the coffee bar so we can chat about it? Because that way it feels more neutral, and you don't have to deal with that power balance of, I'm in their office.
Nice. We just have to be empathetic when we are giving feedback. We should just not be too hard. I think everybody here is there to understand what you're saying. So yeah, you just have to believe in that.
I love that. I love what you're saying, because I think sometimes if we know that the situation is a challenge, I love what you're saying about being empathetic. It doesn't mean I can't hold myself or somebody else accountable. Empathy and accountability go together great, because one of the things I can do is, maybe instead of leading with a statement, I could lead with a question. I could say, so, we had a situation, last week, and such happened. And before I kind of tell you what I think about it, I guess my question is, did you notice anything different about that situation? It didn't work out the way we thought, or is there anything you might have done differently? So even if my manager, giving them the chance to reflect before I tell them what I think is wrong, I would appreciate that. I would appreciate if somebody asked me. And that's the best way to do empathy, is to say, if I put myself in their shoes, how would I want this feedback? And so if my team member has to tell me difficult feedback, the first thing I would say I want them to be able to tell me. I have to make sure I'm sending signal to make it easier for my team to give me feedback. And now my team member needs to be able to say, I would like to know what exactly happened and how it made them feel, or how it impacted them. So the team member needs to be able to say, this is what happened. Not making it judgmental, just making it like fact-based. Almost like the reporter, right? Who, what, when, where, and how. Just cover the facts. and then say, here's how that impacted me. Most leaders can respond to that, but even when they can't, at least you know you've done your job. And that's the last thing I would say about giving feedback is your job is not to change them. Your job is to tell them to share feedback that could help them be better and also help you feel better. And once you do that, that part of it's out of your hands. Now, if I'm still experiencing a problem with my manager or a team member, then I give that feedback again. And then if at some point, if it's not working, we have to look for a different way to resolve it. But I think sometimes we give feedback expecting it to force an immediate change. And I don't really think that's what it's about. That's not the human aspect of giving and receiving feedback. It's about learning and creating a place to learn. And if we have a shared commitment to be better, then the feedback is a necessary part of being better.
Yeah, I think the expectation should be you are putting your point out. That's it. That's the end point for you. And then if it repeats again you do the same thing. I think that is all you can do, right? You cannot change another person. Nice. I think we did speak a lot about feedback. Now let's come to share more stories. What does this AI play a role in this feedback mechanism that you have built? How does it work?
Yeah, so we took what we were doing kind of in workshops and in coaching sessions and one-on-ones, and we said, how do we build a platform? So we built a web-based platform called Seek, which stands for Stories to Engage, Explore, and Question. It's spelled CEQ. And in that platform, people will, let's say we're running a project for a company and they want to understand how employees are experiencing the organizational culture. We will design a research plan. And in that plan, there's something we call a prompt. We all know a lot about prompts nowadays in generative AI, but we use storytelling prompts. So there's a prompt for the employee to respond to. It's almost like one gigantic question that you would ask in research. And that prompt is an invitation for the employee to share a story. So they'll come to the platform, they'll click a link that their employer sends them. They'll come to the platform, register, get their anonymous user ID, and then they will write a story about their experience. So it could be something like, tell us about the most impactful experience you've ever had working in this company. And when they write that, it tells us so much about how they feel about their work, how they feel about impactful work, how they feel about the company as a whole. Then what we're doing with that is we're using AI, and we've been using AI since 2015 when we were part of IBM Watson's Global Entrepreneur Program. So we were using natural language processing and personality insights and predictive emotional analysis in Watson back in 2015 and 16. And we would use that to say, here are the stories, what kind of emotions or attitudes are coming out of it. We've moved that a lot farther. Now what we're doing is we're using those predictive models to create like an emotional map of a group. So you really look at the group at a whole and say, hey, this group is really focused on achievement. They're close, but what they really value is structure. They really want to work on things that are big, that make them feel part of something bigger than themselves. They don't care that much about benefiting themselves. They care much more about benefiting the whole, or whatever that is, right? So it creates a bit of a picture of who the team is or who the company is. And then we're also using AI to automate the analysis of those stories. So the thematics of them, what kind of experiences are people having? All of that is relying on algorithms and methodologies that we put into the platform that just make it easier for the analyst or the researcher to collect all those stories, put an analysis against it, and generate a report very, very quickly. And that kind of research in an organization could take, in like a traditional survey form, that could take a very, very long time to both collect and analyze. And if we were doing workshops, like if you were the researcher, you would hear immediately what you're hearing, but the workshop isn't scalable. And so this is kind of the best of both worlds. It allows a company to invite its employees to share their stories about their experiences with the company in this project. And then it makes it easy for us to analyze those stories very, very quickly using AI and using some other, basic routines, analytical routines that we built into the process that land at a really, really key insight. And the insight is usually around how should we, as the leadership of this group, improve our engagement with employees? How could we improve our leadership? How could we improve customer experience? How could we improve employee experience? all of those are the kind of questions, once we have those stories, that we can ask in the platform. We have where we're not just showing you the emotions and the analytics. There's a generative AI component in the platform today, so it's called Seek GPT. So now I can do the same type of thing I might do with Chat GPT, but directly in the platform on the stories that people are sharing. So for the analyst who's running that project, either we're running it for our customer, or eventually there'll be a self-service approach to it. They can learn a lot very, very quickly, analyze it quickly, and then develop insights that their leaders can use.
Wow, that's a lot. 2015 you have started doing such great technology. That's nice. That's wonderful to hear. So what kind of companies actually approach you guys, and how do they approach you? Like, how can we find you?
Over the years, we've done a lot of work in the travel and tourism space.
Much needed.
It is, because those are experiences that are very emotional, but also very broken, like the travel industry.
Yeah.
Education, we've done work in financial services, we've done work in energy and utilities. And I kind of look at it, all of those are like big industries that are very mature, with lots of workers, lots of customers, and lots of markets. And most of those industries are being disrupted by innovators, and so there's just a real rich opportunity to say, how do we make the employee experience better in those large companies? How do we make the customer experience better in those markets? So that's where a lot of our focus is. And they find us, they go to our website, which is sharemorestories.com, or they go to the information about our Seek platform is at seekplatform.com. That's SEEQ platform.com. Or honestly, they find me on LinkedIn, because I love LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time engaging people on LinkedIn. We share stories about our own experiences. We share case studies there. And for me, LinkedIn is a place where I enjoy being part of a dialogue around how are we navigating work, how are we navigating business, how are we navigating society, because I think a lot of people think LinkedIn's just a professional platform. I'm like, well, if your job is a community leader, that's your profession. If your job is a full-time creative, because you're a writer or a filmmaker, you can talk about writing and filmmaking. I don't believe in this idea that professional is only what some professionals want it to be. I think professional is whatever you do for a living.
Wonderful. That's very nice. So when you were just talking, I was just thinking this. Do you have any real-time changes that you have seen which the companies approached you and then they have grown big with employee satisfaction being higher?
Definitely. We've done some work both on the employee side and some on the customer side, where the kind of impact we want to have is not a short-term thing. You need to apply the insights that we're developing, and then you need to measure yourself, or let us measure you and work with you to see if it's actually making a change. And so, if you hire us to do a project, you'll get a project-based insight, and then it's up to you to apply that insight and see if it changes things. Some of our customers have engaged us for a much longer period of time, and now we're able to see, as they are shifting the way they lead and the way they manage the business and manage their organization, they are actually seeing the benefits. They're also finding places where they're still stuck. So, we're working with a large health and wellness organization, and they've been working with us for a year and a half now, and we've been able to map the employee experience over that time frame. We've been able to connect it to the customer experience. We've been able to help them understand what needs to change about their leadership and even their communications. And they are navigating basically an organizational transformation. You can see anecdotally and in the data, you can see where people are benefiting because their leaders applied the insights and recommendations we gave them. You can also see places where some of the team members are still maybe struggling a little bit, and the things that we've provided guidance on, you can see where that's being implemented and where there's still opportunities. And so the good news, though, is that's true in any organization. And the difference is, are you willing to still keep focusing on improvement? And that, in that particular case, they are so committed that it's easy to share feedback with them on, here's what's working, here's what's still not working, here's what we need to improve, because they want that feedback, because from the CEO on down, they are so committed to strengthening their culture, to strengthening their impact in their customers, and ultimately to delivering more sustainable outcomes. That's a beautiful client. Not every client has been like that. Some are like, we just have this problem and we want you to help us understand it. And so those, we often rely on them to tell us how what we shared with them, how what we helped them learn improved. Where we get to see it all the way through is really, really gratifying. And that's happening for us more and more. We have a number of customers who now use us in different parts of their business. So it's not just one project or one department, it's another. And that's really helpful because not only are we growing, we're also able to show different leaders the benefit of using this kind of a process. And I tell them, if you have an employee engagement survey, great. This does not replace it. This is a way to make sense of your employee engagement survey because it's not going to tell you why things are what they are. It's only going to tell you where and who and when and somewhat. But you really need to go deeper to understand the why and the how. And that's what our platform does for them.
Nice, beautiful. It's very nice to see when your work is actually making something impactful in the society, right?
Huge.
I think you're in a very beautiful place now. Glad that we could talk on our podcast. I think one last question might be a silly question, but I want to ask you. So how does feedback work in your organization?
That's a great question. Like I said, for me, I really want to create a culture. I've always wanted to create a culture where feedback didn't feel so much like an event, but it was part of our ongoing relationship. I think if you were to ask people who've worked for me over the years, whether I was in corporate or now leading our team, giving me feedback is generally not that hard. There are times when I'm definitely blind to my own shortcomings, and if I'm under stress, I might not pay attention as much as I need to, and maybe I don't see that this is a problem. So when the person's bringing it to me, I might be reacting partly because I didn't realize it was a problem. But what I try to do then is I try to make space emotionally and otherwise for them to feel comfortable sharing the feedback. The best way to do that is for me to ask them questions. How are we doing? Whenever I give them feedback, I say, do you have any feedback for me? Is there anything we can do, anything you need from me? Because the more we have those kinds of conversations, the less likely there's some big thing that they wish they could tell me that they're not telling me. I have a couple of team members though, we are much more like peers, and with us, it's really, we keep it straight. I mean, we've both been in business for a very long time. We've worked together for a number of years. So we don't hold back from each other. If there's an issue that he needs to let me know about me or the team, he just tells me. And he's very direct, and I can handle that. And I'm also very direct with him. But I change my style depending on the team member. If I have a person who's very new to work, directness can sometimes be intimidating. And if you have a strong personality and you're the boss and I know it's hard for them. So I try to be really, really approachable. I try to ask them and give them plenty of opportunities to say, hey, not James, could you stop doing that and start doing this, to say, this is what I need. And yes, I'm getting it, or no, I'm not getting it. So I'll say things like, what's working well? What's not working well? Like, what should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? What should we change? That's a great frame for asking and giving feedback, is to say, what should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? What should we change? And sometimes we'll say, what should we start? So you asked that question a while ago, like, how do you give feedback to a manager? Hey manager, here's some things that I love that you're doing and I want you to keep doing. Here's some things that I think if we could adjust them, it may be more effective. And here's like one or two things that it would be really helpful for me if we didn't do that, or if you didn't do that. And then maybe here's one or two things that you're not doing, but I would love it if you could. That's the same, I try to make it easy for people to give me that feedback by asking them that. What should I keep doing? What should I stop doing? What should I start doing? And what do you need me to change? And that doesn't mean like they give it all the time. I mean, we're a small team, but we're also spread out around the country. So a lot of our conversation is about constant improvement. Me, them, the business, the work. So when you're in a constant improvement mode, there's not a lot of things that go unsaid.
Nice.
But that's the culture we've created on purpose, because I can't afford to find out 6 months from now that my teammates needed me to do something differently. We don't have that luxury. We have to make improvements as we go. The only way to do that is to find out.
Very true. I think that's where you stand out. Your thought stands out as a great leader. I'm happy that we met today and discussed this. And I think to just summarize what you just said about leadership and feedback, I think it's You have created a tool which will improve a normal leader to be a better leader, and a normal organization to, empathizes with its employees and gives the best to its customers. It's a very important tool that you have created, and I'm happy that AI could do so much improvement in what you have built. Yeah.
So the last thing on that, it is, first of all, it is a team effort. Nobody builds anything alone unless they truly just work by themselves. So, our team is incredible, and my teammate Andy, who's our Chief Technology Officer, he's been in this journey with me for years, and his strategy and his skill set is huge. And then as we bring new team members in, they get to contribute. So I'm lucky because everything we do is really the result of a very collaborative team effort. And it doesn't mean it's always easy, but it is very team driven. And I love that. That's the kind of place I want to work. That's the kind of place I want to create for other people. Because I just think for me personally, that's when I'm at my best, when I'm working as part of a team.
Nice. And I think what I just understand heard you for the last 40-50 minutes is a real leadership is nothing but to have an open and a honest conversation. That's it. Everything else will fall in place because it's all team effort.
Yeah, because if you can, that's exactly right. If you can set that tone and create that climate, you can figure everything else out together.
Yeah.
I think you have to have, I will add one thing, you have to have a vision, and then you have to be able to communicate openly and honestly. If you have those two things, you can do a lot.
Nice. Thank you for doing this, and maybe until we catch next time, just be curious and this great leader that you are, be happy.
Absolutely, and I hope you do the same, because I love what you're doing with this podcast, and I think you are already trying to help so many other people, colleagues and teammates and people like you. So I think the growth that you're offering to people is beautiful. So congratulations on your podcast.